Okay, everyone, it is 9:05, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, I would like to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Priscilla Echeverry. I'm with Pasadena Water and Power, and we are very excited to be hosting our very first Spray to Drip program, a workshop, virtual workshop. Um, uh, so I do want to introduce our team. So one sec here. So again, thank you so much for being here, our first Spray to Drip workshop. I do want to put a face to name to our little water conservation team, without whom none of this would be possible. We have our Water Conservation Programs Manager, Ursula Schmidt, myself, Water Conservation Programs Analyst for Pasadena Water and Power, and we have Jonathan Morales and Christian Cox, who are also part of our water conservation team, which we are very appreciative of. Okay, one sec. Okay, so before we get started, a few housekeeping items. I do want to let you know that this presentation will be 45 minutes long, with an additional 15 minutes at the end for questions. Everyone will be muted upon entry. That means that we can't hear you. But if you have any questions, please go ahead and funnel them through the chat box. So there is a chat box. We will be going through them during the presentation. We'll be answering questions, and then at the very end, we'll be answering those questions as well if you want to stick around for those additional 15 minutes. We will also be emailing you this PowerPoint presentation next week. So you don't have to worry about writing down any of the links I'll be showing you. We're going to give you a lot of information, but you'll have all of that with you. I will send that via email. So for the next few slides, I do want to go over a few programs that I feel are very relevant to you because they're landscape programs that we have here at Pasadena Water Power. And these are programs that can support you with your landscape project, which we are assuming you will probably be doing because you want to get a drip kit. And we will be discussing all details about this program, the drip kit, how you get your drip kit, because I know that's the reason that you're here. But prior to that, I'm going to give you a few, just some brief information on other programs that you may be interested in as well. So if you could see my presentation here, this program is our $2 per square foot turf rebate. So Pasadena Water and Power does have a $2 per square foot turf replacement rebate, which is a really great rebate. However, it does come with criteria that you have to meet in order to receive that rebate. One of those criteria is to actually retrofit your spray irrigation to a drip, microspray, or bubblers. So this is a reason that we also wanted to have this program and launch this spray to drip program, is so that we can help our residents achieve also getting a $2 per square foot rebate. And the link is on this slide, which we'll be sending to you. Another great tool and resource for our residents is our Pasadena Landscaping Guide. So this is a really fantastic guide. The link is on this slide, and it has all types of galleries, tours, photos of different plant palettes. If you really need inspiration or don't really know where to start or how you want your landscape to look, this is a really great resource to just play around with. So I highly encourage everyone to take a look at that. We also have a laundry to landscape gray water program. So this is completely free for all Pasadena residents. And Pasadena Water and Power, completely at no cost, goes in and installs a gray water system from your washing machine to your landscape. So this reuses the water from your washing machine to plants, shrubs, or trees in your landscape. This is a really great tool as well. And the link is there if you want any more information. Okay, so now the reason that you're all here today. So you are interested in our spray to drip program. I want to very briefly go over the very simple process we have for this program. A few details before, I do want to let you know that these kits that we are providing our residents are funded by a grant that Pasadena Water and Power received from the Bureau of Reclamation. It is also for residential customers only. And then we also have 2 kits per household. So you can receive 2 kits. So just keep that in mind. So in order to get the kit, you have to submit an application. Our application, if you have not already submitted it, is on our Spray to Drip webpage. The link is on this slide here. And you can either email it to our water inbox at City of Pasadena, or you can mail it in. The application has the address where you can mail it in. So once we receive your application, it's been approved, it's in our system and database, which doesn't take too long at all. You will be emailed, you'll be notified via email when you can go ahead and pick up that kit at your local irrigation supply store. So it's really simple. It's really that easy. Part of receiving the kit is also attending this workshop, which you're doing right now, which is fantastic. So it's a really easy process. And this kit does retrofit spray irrigation to drip irrigation up to 400 square feet. So it's a pretty substantial amount. So now that you know a little bit of the process, the very simple process, in order to get this kit, I do want to show you this very brief 2-minute video talking about how you install the system yourself. So the remainder of this presentation, really the focus for our residents, is to teach you guys how to install this yourself. So yeah, that's the biggest idea. Once you get this big kit with all of these tools, we would love for you guys to install it yourself. And that's what this presentation is about. And I will now play this 2-minute video so you can get an idea.
Spray heads are a great way to irrigate large turf areas, but sometimes using spray heads for smaller, odd-shaped areas can be difficult, expensive, or inefficient. Drip irrigation allows you to put water right where it's needed, at the root zone. The Rainbird 1800 Retro Kit contains everything you need to quickly convert to drip, including a 30 psi pressure regulator, a 200 mesh stainless steel filter, and a low-profile elbow and T-fitting for easy connection to drip tubing. Here, you can see several spray heads are being used to irrigate small planting areas close to a driveway, which is causing overspray and runoff. Let's convert this spray zone into a drip zone. First, remove the existing spray cap. Remove the internal components of the spray head and replace them with the 1800 Retro Kit components. Then screw on the low-profile T or elbow fitting. Because this is a dense planting area, we'll install Rainbird XFD drip tubing. Measure the tubing and cut it to the correct length. Attach a coupling and flush cap to one end of the tubing. Then attach the other end to the barb T or elbow. Now repeat these steps for the other run of tubing and connect it to the other side of the fitting. Finally, cap off the remaining spray heads. The new drip system puts water only where it's needed, at the root zone of the plant. We've eliminated the overspray and runoff that was caused by the spray heads, saving both water and money.
Okay, everyone, so that was a brief overview. We will now be going into the presentation. I do want to let you know this video is from Rainbird, which is the same company that we will be receiving these kits from. They are a really good company. They offer a lot of assistance for troubleshooting and any of that. So we will be providing information on that as well at the end. But now I do want to hand this over to our instructor for the presentation, which is Tim Wheeler, and he is a horticulturist and he works with Pasadena Water and Power on our water efficient landscapes. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute him, and he's going to take over the technical aspect of the presentation. So just bear with me for just a sec. Are you there, Tim?
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, everyone, this is Tim Wheeler. Again, I want to remind, I'm sorry, Tim, I just funnel your questions through the chat box and we will be answering anything we can, and then we'll answer at the end. Okay, Tim, go ahead. I'm going to mute myself.
Okie doke. All right, guys. Well, thanks for getting up on a Saturday morning. The video that Rainbird put together it's pretty self-explanatory. And when you get the kit, there's also literature in the kit that will hopefully, along with this class, really demystify it, because this is about the easiest way to install drip that I've ever seen. In making your conversion, depending on what size yard you have, one kit may be enough to do your whole front yard. And because you qualify for 2 kits with this program, again, if you have a small backyard, you might be able to retrofit your entire yard, both front and back, with the 2 kits. It really depends on how many plants you have and the size of your yard. The benefits to doing this, in addition to conserving water, which is our main push, because drip is, if it's installed right, it can be almost 100% efficient. And spray is nowhere near that. A really good spray system might be 60 to 70% efficient, which means there's quite a bit of water that isn't benefiting the plants. With drip, virtually all of it goes to the root zone. But the other benefits to doing this are kind of on the infrastructure side, in that you're not spraying water out that's getting on wooden surfaces like decking. It's not getting on stucco like the side of your house. It's not getting on sidewalks, which can be a liability, a slip liability. So in addition to the water savings, there are a lot of other really good benefits to going with drip. Okay, next slide. So how do you know what is drip exactly? Well, it's how we apply the water, and the key to drip is putting the water on much slower than we do with spray. Drip irrigation system, we measure how much water is put down in gallons per hour. That's what that GPH stands for. A typical spray system, we apply the water in gallons per minute, typically between a half a gallon a minute and a gallon a minute. So the spray systems put water down much, much faster. Can you go ahead and go to me so I can show the valve?
Can everyone see Tim? Let me see.
Can you see me? There we go.
Yeah.
What you're looking at is an automatic sprinkler valve here. And typically, you will have these in both the front yard and the backyard. And it's currently what is operating your spray system. When you make the conversion to drip, you're going to use the same valve. If it's wired to a controller, all of that stays the same. None of that changes. What is going to change is how many of them you need. Again, if you have a relatively small yard, front yard, backyard, you may only need 1 valve where you might be using 2 or 3 valves now. So that's another huge benefit to converting over to drip, is that your existing infrastructure goes a lot farther. Each one of these valves is going to be considered a zone. That's the term we use in landscaping. And you will probably only need 1, maybe 2 irrigation zones for your front yard and for your backyard. So 1 or 2 valves will be enough. What we're going to do is we're going to use the existing infrastructure that's already buried in the ground, the piping already in the ground that goes out to your spray sprinklers. That all stays in place. You don't have to mess with the valve. If you were installing a traditional drip system, you would actually have to come off of this valve, cut into the piping, and install a pressure regulator and install a filter, because those are critical components in drip irrigation. This kit does that for you, and I'll show you where. Okay, next slide. So can you go back 1 slide? I missed 1 point.
Sure.
You'll see there that the pressure has to be controlled for your drip. And this system does it for you. It also, you need to filter the water to make sure that you don't have any particulates in there that are going to clog. the system up, and the filter is also included in this system. But instead of having to cut open your pipe and doing it at the valve, we're going to actually do it out where the conversion takes place. Okay, next. So there's what the kit looks like. It comes in a big box, and basically everything you need to convert one zone to drip is in that box. You get lots of tubing, about 300 feet of tubing, and you get all the fittings, everything you need to make this conversion of a zone over to drip is in the box. Okay, next. Everything's packaged this way, and towards the end of the presentation, we're going to kind of go through each of the individual components. I'll show you those separately. But just in general, when you open the box, you're going to have 3 rolls of that tubing. Here on the photograph, there's only 1. And everything is packaged in bags that tells you exactly what the component is. Next. This is copies of the literature that are included. It's very detailed. Pretty much everything you need is in these 2 pages right here. So it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just really kind of orienting yourself with what the different components are and how they go together. Okay, next.
I also want to say that these documents are on our webpage since they are very helpful.
So there it is. That's where the magic takes place. Can you go back to me?
Oh, yeah. One sec, guys.
There we go.
Yeah, okay.
So in that drawing, and we'll go back to that drawing when I finish my explanation here, but what you're going to receive is something that it actually looks like a traditional pop-up spray sprinkler head, but this is actually the conversion device. And inside this device, the body here, you have your filter, your mesh screen, and you have your pressure regulator. That's what this component is right here. That's where the pressure is being automatically regulated. So instead of having to cut open the piping on your system at the valve and install components, you don't have to do that. Literally what you would do is install this in place of one of your existing pop-up spray sprinkler heads. So a couple of caveats on this. Rainbird kind of assumes that the sprinklers that you're going to be replacing are Rainbird sprinklers. And, you know, obviously that's not, you know, everybody doesn't have Rainbird. So depending on what kind of head you have, if you have some of the old brass, we call them lawn life type sprinklers, the little small brass pop-ups, this system doesn't work to convert that. You would literally have to replace all of those pop-ups. But if you have a pop-up spray system that, and the components look like this, whether they be Rainbird or Toro or one of the other manufacturers, then this system will work. If you are not, if you don't currently have Rainbird pop-up sprinklers, then you will have to dig up one of the sprinklers and replace it with this device. If you happen to have Rainbird sprinklers, you know, let's say something like this with a pop-up spray nozzle on it, you can do like they showed in the video. You literally just unscrew the top and pull the guts out. So this is now empty, but remember, it's still in the ground. It's still buried. You didn't even have to dig it up. You just unscrew the top and pull out the guts. And the new guts just drop right in. That's our filter. Here's our pressure regulator. And you've made the first big step in making the conversion. Now a little bit about which head do you choose in the zone. Ideally, you choose a head that's kind of in the middle. And when you choose your fitting to put on here, you use a T. And that way you're feeding the water from the center of the irrigation zone. And what you can actually do in this case is when you put your tubing on, you can come off one side, you can wind through the zone and come back to the other side. And that's going to give you your best water distribution because you're putting the water into the center of the zone and then you're feeding it from both directions. So that is the optimal way to do it, but you do not have to do that. This system is designed that, say, the easiest sprinkler to get to is the one on the very end of the zone. You still go through the process of either changing out the entire body or just the guts inside the body. And then you can use an elbow to run the system. So all the water is going to come out and go through this point out into the system. Now, if you can, once you get out into the system, you can always loop. You know, you can always tie the pipe back into itself, and if you can, that's great. Okay, back to the slides. So there it is, and you see in that little the small picture there, they used an elbow. You don't need any glue with this system. You don't need any Teflon tape with this system. Everything actually pushes together and is a press fit. Okay, next slide. So if you do happen to have plastic bodied pop-up sprays like I showed you, but they're not Rainbird, they also make components for, and what you're looking at here is actually the cap that blocks off all the rest of the sprinklers in that zone. Can you go back to me?
Oh, sure, 1 sec.
Great. So once you install the one head that's going to be where you distribute your water from, what do you do with all the rest of the sprinklers in that zone? Remember, we're going to convert the entire zone. You can't leave any active pop-up sprinklers in that zone. Everything has to go to drip. Well, you don't have to dig up every sprinkler head and, you know, cap off the pipe. What you can actually do is just cap the rest of the sprinkler heads. So basically, in each zone, you're going to have one conversion sprinkler head where the drip comes out, the water for the drip comes out, and then every other sprinkler head in that zone is basically going to be blanked off. You don't have to dig them up, you don't have to remove them, you can blank them right in the ground. Okay, can we go back to the slide? So what you're going to do on those others is you're going to basically take the guts out of the sprinkler, just like I showed you if you were going to put the kit in, and you're going to put one of those plastic caps that you see on that slide onto the body. And basically what it does is it just blocks the sprinkler head so no water can come out there. It makes it really easy instead of having to dig up every single sprinkler head and cap the pipe itself. Okay, next. So there they are showing the process of leaving the body in the ground and literally just removing the guts from that particular sprinkler. And that's going to be where they're feeding the water for the new drip system. Okay, next. There they are installing the guts. They just slide right in place. Be careful that you don't get any dirt in there when you're doing it, because you'll have to flush the system to get all the dirt out, and it might clog some of your emitters. So be kind of careful about that if you're working with the body still in the ground. But they're feeding with an elbow. So this is, you know, a sprinkler head on the end of the zone, and they're putting the filter and the pressure regulator in, and they've attached the elbow at the top where the tubing is going to go. Okay, next. So there are your two choices. You can come off of one sprinkler head at the end, or you see on the other picture that you're coming off with a T. And the T is a better way to go, but it doesn't make a huge difference in the operation of how the system's going to work. It's still going to work fine. if you use an elbow instead. So don't get too caught up in that. It's just kind of optimal. Okay, next. So now I think they're capping the sprinkler head. Can you go back to me?
Oh, sure.
So you have a sprinkler, the rest of those sprinklers in that zone are still in the ground. You're basically going to take the guts out, and then you literally just screw this blanking cap. See, there's no hole or anything in that. It's just completely blank. And it screws on tight. And that is going to prevent water from coming out the rest of the spray heads that we've just left in that zone. And again, they make these caps for other models or other brands of sprinkler. So you're going to need to look at what kind of sprinklers you have just to make sure that you get the right cap. I think the threads are, the only difference is the threads that they use, the pitch of the threads. Okay, so we blanked off the system. Back to the slides. There we go. In 4 slides, they're showing you the more or less the entire process of making the transition from a spray system to a drip system. Next slide. So the tubing that we use, it's a flexible tubing. It is ultraviolet resistant, so it doesn't break down in the sun as fast. There's 2 different kinds of tubing included with the kit. One has emitters factory installed on the inside of the tube. You get 2 rolls of that with the emitters are already installed. You literally just lay it out, make sure that it's in the over the root zone of the plants that you're watering. But what if you have a zone where maybe you have a section with no plants? You don't want to be putting water down there because the plants aren't going to benefit from it, and you're just going to grow weeds. So they also include some tubing that does not have any emitters in it. It's a blank, and you can use sections of that in your system for areas where you do not want to put water down. Okay, next. One of the things that they've done that's pretty smart is I showed you in an earlier slide what one of those rolls of tubing looks like. It has these bands. There's about 4 or 5 of those bands, and then they wrap it in shrink wrap plastic. Well, the beauty of what they've done is you go in and you remove the black plastic bands like it shows you here in the slide. They're cutting it so they can pull it out. But you leave the tubing in the shrink wrap plastic. And the tubing is designed to be fed from the inside of the coil. And what it does is it keeps the coil from kind of being like a snake and unwinding automatically on, and then you're having to deal with this big unwound coil, especially if you're going to have tubing left over that you want to keep for maybe doing another zone or another project down the road. So make sure you leave the shrink wrap tubing around the coil. It'll keep it contained. Just cut the black plastic straps. Now, Rainbird recommends that you use a tubing cutter. They manufacture one that you can buy. If you're going to do a lot of this work, I would recommend maybe picking one of those up. But if you're only going to do your house, one time, your front yard, your backyard, you can go to me real quick. I've had success cutting the tubing with just plain shears, good quality shears, or even like a box cutter. Both of these work. It's not mandatory that you buy one of those tubing cutters because both of these work just fine at cutting the tubing. Here's a piece that I cut off just to kind of test it, and it works great. You can see, well, let me see if I can do this better. No, not really. it's got a very thin wall, and that's what makes it flexible. There we go. That's not too bad. You can see it's pretty thin stuff. So it is flexible enough to wind around plants and things like that. But because it's also fairly thin walled, it's not hard to cut. So you don't have to add those cutters necessarily. Okay, back to the slides. So there we go. It shows them unwinding the tubing from inside of the coil. The tube, the picture on the, well, it'd be my right. So you can see where the emitter is factory installed. That's what that little black slit is in the side of the tubing. That's actually a drip emitter. The tubing the kit provides drip that is going to be about a half a gallon per hour. It's actually 0.6 GPH or 0.6 gallons per hour for each one of the drip emitters in the tubing. And the emitters are 12 inches on center. So it's designed for areas where you've got pretty high concentration of plant material. If you have a yard and you've got larger plants, but they're spaced out, maybe 6, 8, 10 feet apart, then you can actually use that blank tubing to go between the plants. Make a loop around the base of the plant with the tubing that has the emitters in it. And then to get to the next plant, just use a piece of the blank tubing so you're not putting water down where there aren't any plants. One of the other things that this slide shows pretty good is put your tubing out in the sun in the morning before you try to work with it. Warm it up because it can get pretty stiff as in cold weather. So typically, if you just go out first thing in the morning, put the tubing out in the sunshine for half hour, 45 minutes, it'll warm up and it'll be much, much easier to work with. Okay, next slide. So also included in the kit is this tool that you see on your slide in front of you. And this is a pretty handy tool because the clearances on the tubing and the fittings are very tight, so that watertight basically. And so it can be very difficult sometimes to install the different fittings in the tubing. And they've developed this tool to help you do that. Can you go ahead and go to me? So here's a picture of that exact tool it just showed you. And you'll notice on the back side that the fittings just slide right into it. It's designed specifically for their fittings. So this is what the tool looks like. And then when you have a fitting that you want to install, it literally just slides right in. And then what you will do is your tubing, it makes it much easier to hold on to this while you press the tubing onto the barbed fitting. So great little tool, and it works with all of their different fittings. It works with their keys. It works with their L's. And it works with their couplings. So this comes with it. This is not something that you have to buy outside of the kit. You will actually get this in the kit, and it really makes installing the fittings much easier to do. The other thing you can do with this is, you see these are actually made for your fingers, but they work as a great little tool for widening the mouth of the tubing. So right before you're going to try to push the tubing on here, and you can see how big that barb is, you can take the tubing and open it up a little bit and then slide it on, and it makes it much easier. So not only does it hold your fittings, but it also works really well at opening the tubing up so that they slide onto those fittings better, easier. Okay, back to the slides. Next slide. That's just a slide demonstrating what I just showed you. And again, you can use it with all the different fittings that they have. Okay, there we go. There you can see it in action. So kind of the last step, once you've laid out the tubing amongst the different plant materials, the last step is going to be installing, and you can see that right there. It looks like a big staple, and that's exactly what it is. It's a landscape staple. Can you go ahead and go to me? And you get these in the kit. And basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to staple the tubing down to the soil so that you're not as likely to move the tubing if you happen to be out in the yard working amongst the plants. Sometimes this tubing can be really easy to get caught on your foot and you don't even know it. And when you pull this away from the base of the plant, the root zone of the plant, now when you water, you're not watering where it needs to be. So it's really important that you get the tubing laid out exactly where you want it, where it's watering the root zone of the plant properly, and then you staple it down so it stays exactly where you put it. Okay, next. So the kind of the last step, once you have the tubing, you put in the conversion kit, you've laid out all your tubing, and if you're looping it back on itself, you don't need to worry about necessarily having a flush cap. But if the tubing goes out and it just dead ends, then you're going to want to put a flush cap on it. Next slide. And that's what that device is that he has in his hand. It's got a cap on the end that you can remove. And so probably once or twice a year, you're going to want to go out and take the cap off, turn the system on, open the valve, and blow the water out the end of the tubing for a few seconds. And all you're doing is cleaning out any potential debris that might have accumulated down at the end of the piece of tube. Can you go to me? So here we go. This is what that flush cap looks like. And that's the cap itself. When you remove this is now an open piece of pipe. So when you turn the valve on, the water is just going to come gushing out this end, which is what you want, because you want to clean out any debris that might have accumulated down at the end of the line. And then you just put the cap back in and you're good to go. And you probably only need to do that once, maybe twice a year. You're going to definitely want to install this if you are coming off your system with an elbow, and so you have dead ends. Not quite so critical if you loop the system, using a T. But that's called the flush cap. You get 2 of these. So in theory, maybe you have a line running one direction and you have a separate line running an opposite direction. They're not looped together. Then you would have 2 dead ends. And so you would put one of these on the dead end on this side, and you would put the other one of these on the dead end over on the other side. Okay. Next slide. There we go. So there's just kind of a close-up that shows the cap on the end. Basically, you twist and pull at the same time to remove the cap. Okay, next. So that pretty well covers installing the drip irrigation. There are a few more things that you are going to want to do. And that is, the drip system will last, indefinitely if you keep the if you keep the sunlight off of it. It's really important, even though it is made from ultraviolet, resistant plastic, it will still eventually, the sunlight will take a toll on it. And so the best, and this is true of any of your irrigation components, but especially drip, you want to keep the sunlight off of it. And the best way to do that is to actually apply a layer of mulch over the top. And as long as you maintain that layer of mulch over it and where you can't see any of the drip components, they will last for virtually forever. Priscilla, do you want to cover this slide?
Yeah, sure. So the city of Pasadena does have a mulch recycling program where our residents can go and pick up mulch completely free. This link here on this slide has all of the dates and the locations where you can pick that up.
Kind of one last thing that you're going to need to remember is that right now your spray system is probably only running for a handful of minutes, somewhere between maybe 10 minutes and 15 minutes each time it comes on, each zone. With your drip irrigation, remember, we're going from watering in gallons per minute to watering in gallons per hour. So you're going to have to increase your watering time. Where before you might have only watered for 8 minutes or 10 minutes, now you might have to water for 20 minutes or 30 minutes because we're putting the water down so much slower. So don't forget to make that adjustment, especially if you have a controller, one of those, your sprinklers are automatic and they have a clock of some kind turning them on, turning them off. The other thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to water during the day. Specifically at a time when you're most likely to be around. And the reason for that being is that drip is kind of silent when it runs. It doesn't spray water every place. So, with your current spray system now, you're probably watering very early in the morning. And when you come out in the morning, you can tell that it ran because the plants are all wet. You can see the moisture. With drip, you're not going to have that effect. So if the tubing gets pulled away from the base of the plant or an emitter gets broken or something like that happens, you get a small hole in the tubing, you're never going to see it because if you have your sprinklers running in the early morning hours. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to change it to watering, preferably still in the morning because that is the best time to water for the plants. But you're going to want to run your system during daylight hours. So if there's a problem, you can visually see it. You're also going to want to take a walk through the yard every now and again after the system has run. And you're going to look for wet spots at the base of all the plants. Those little wet spots are the only thing that's going to tell you whether the system is operating properly or not. So you're going to need to make those visual take on those visual cues by walking through your yard and looking at whether the system is watering properly or not. The one thing that this does for you by retrofitting to drip, it makes you exempt from Pasadena's watering ordinance. Priscilla, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the city of Pasadena does have a water waste ordinance where we do residents or customers can only water. Right now it's 3 days out of the week. Is it 2 or 3? Yeah, so it's 3 days. So it's Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays before 9 a.m. and after 6 p.m. So you are not allowed to water or irrigate outside of those hours. So you are exempt from that if you do have drip irrigation.
Okay, next slide.
Sure. Okay, so this slide just has some helpful links for you all. Hold on, I have to. Helpful links for you all. If you have any questions, if you need any information on all of our any of our water conservation programs, rebates, we have videos, we have resources on these links here. So I definitely encourage you to take a look there. If you have any questions regarding the rebates or the programs or anything, this is our water@cityofpasadena.net inbox. So I encourage you to send in your questions there and we will get back to you.
May I say something real quick?
Sure.
This style of drip irrigation system has kind of become the default system that we are using at Pasadena Water and Power for different landscape programs that we have going on through the city. We have recently re-landscaped the fire stations, removing turf and replacing them with water efficient plants. We've just are in the process of completing kind of phase one of a major reservoir re-landscaping project. And Jonathan, who you met earlier, is an absolute expert with this system because he's put down thousands of feet of this drip tubing. And we've been doing it for years now, and we have found great success. It's very reliable and trouble-free. Which is nice. You know, the typically with drip, you get great efficiency, but the trade-off is that there's a fair amount of maintenance that goes with it. This is one of the least maintenance drip systems I've ever worked with. You do have to clean the filter every now and again inside the sprinkler body. You do need to flush the system out every now and again. You do need to go through, walk through your landscape occasionally with the system turned on just to make sure that you don't have some kind of rodent damage or something like that. But outside of those things, the systems have just been fantastically reliable. They really work great. And so if you do have any, technical questions on the install once you get into it, feel free to contact Pasadena Water and Power because they got some people on staff that are real experts with this. They put down an awful lot of it.
So thank you so much for that, Tim. However, for a specific troubleshooting for this specific kit, we will be directing towards the Rainbird company. They have a really great team, really good resource for customers. So and they have a lot of resources online for videos, but I will be emailing all of our participants details on that after the presentation. So I do want to do a really quick recap again of our process. In order to receive this kit, you will have to submit an application. You can submit the application if you already haven't done so on our PWP Spray to Drip webpage. That's where you can find the application. And you can either mail it into our water@cityofpasadena.net inbox, or you can mail it in and the address is on the application. Once we get the application, you're approved, you're in our database, then you will be notified via email when the kits are ready for pickup at a local irrigation supply store. I will give you the information on where that will be and what the location is. It is local, it is in Pasadena. It is limits 2 kits per household. It's for residential customers only, and these kits are funded by a grant that we received by the Bureau of Reclamation. I also want to let you guys know that we do, our small but mighty water conservation team holds many different workshops for the community throughout the year. And if you are interested, you can definitely go on our events page. The link is on this slide here to find out and to get updates on what we're doing. Okay, so in this portion, we will now be answering questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for your patience. Ursa will be fielding the questions and asking Tim.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So we did get a lot of questions in the chat box, and we tried to answer a lot of them while we were. So if you do have the chat function open, you can take a look, and I think we got to about 50% of the questions there. So some of these might be duplicate, and we are going to try to hit some of these pretty quickly. If you feel like your question has not been addressed, then please go ahead and put it back in the chat box, and we'll get to it. So one question that came up quite a bit is, do we have a list of recommended vendors for installation for installing drip systems? So we do not currently have a list of recommended vendors. It's something we'll talk about internally, and maybe we can put a link up to vendors that are local. But like Priscilla mentioned, Rainbird, who supplies this kit, has a customer service staff. They have great troubleshooting and videos, and so that'll be an excellent resource. And we will be having that resource and those videos and any other links to potential local installers up on the webpage. One of the questions that came up, and this is for you, Tim, if we go from an 8 zone to a 2 zones, does it require any changes to the PVC piping connection?
No. Each one of those zones would be standalone. So you would leave the valve in place. You would leave the PVC pipe that's in the ground in place. You would literally just convert one of your pop-up sprinkler heads and then cap the rest in that zone.
Okay. And another question that came up was, can you split the zones at the head adapter?
Yeah, and by split the zone, what I'm assuming you're going to think, what you're thinking is, well, I've got four zones now, and I'm not going to need 4 zones when I have the drip. So yes, you can combine 2 zones together. You know, you should have plenty of tubing to do that, but you'll only need 1 valve to operate. So you just pick which valve you want to run both of those zones on in the future. And then what you would do is you would cut the pipe on the second valve, the valve you're not going to use, and just cap it. Or you could take the valve out if you wanted to. I would recommend leaving the valve in place just in case in the future you want to expand or something like that. And just where the pipe comes out of the valve on the downstream side of the valve, you just cut and cap that. And then you can combine those 2 zones into a single zone.
And can you combine, and you might have already mentioned this, but can you combine spray and drip in the same zone?
No. Remember, gallons per minute versus gallon per hour. When you combine spray with drip, typically either your spray runs too long because you've set your sprinklers now to run at 30 minutes or 40 minutes, whatever you need to for the gallon per hour part, to make sure you're putting enough water down with the drip. So you end up with a lot of runoff because the sprinklers are running way too long. Or you cut the time way back to 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, whatever you were running your spray system for, and now you're not running the drip long enough. You're not getting enough water out of the drip system. So you really do need to separate those two types of systems.
Another question that we had is if the caps are included, the sprinkler caps are included in the kit.
The sprinkler caps are included, but they're caps for the Rainbird heads.
Okay.
So if you have a different brand of sprinkler head, like Toro or Nelson or one of those, you might have to get a different cap.
Okay. Another question that came in is there a way to test a zone for leaks before converting?
Oh, that's a good question, and typically it's just based on observation, especially with a spray system where you're running high pressure and a lot of volume. The leaks typically show up pretty easily. Once you convert over to drip, leaks tend to have a tendency to take longer to show up, but the only place you'd really be worried about not being able to see the leak is in the pipe from the valve to the first head where you make your conversion. That will be buried. Everything else after you make your conversion is going to be above ground. So if there's a split in the pipe or a bad connection or something like that, that should be pretty easy to spot because all of that's going to be above ground.
Okay. Another question we had is, what is the lifespan of these kits? Will the sun make the tubing crack? Any suggestions for that?
Yes, it will. I mean, we're still talking years. A system like this will last years. I don't have an exact number. Rainbird probably does. I'm sure Rainbird is, they're a very aggressive company as far as testing and research. And so they probably actually have a number on what the lifespan would be. The key is keeping the sunlight off of it. If you can keep the sunlight off of the system, it will last indefinitely. So put the mulch down and then maintain the mulch. Remember that once or twice a year, you may have to go in and put another layer of mulch on. But there's a lot of benefits to doing that. Not only are you covering up all the irrigation components to keep the sunlight off of them, but that organic mulch is going to break down and put nutrients back into the soil. It provides a kind of an insulating blanket so that the soil doesn't get so hot in the summertime or as cold in the wintertime. And mulch is a fantastic way to maintain soil moisture because it keeps the sunlight off the soil and that you don't evaporate the water out of the soil. So, you know, we say today put mulch down to cover up the irrigation because we're concerned about, you know, keeping the sunlight off of it. But if you do that, there are lots and lots of other benefits that are going to come along with that.
And how often do you recommend remulching? I saw a question come in on that.
If you put the mulch down at like 3.5, 4 inches thick, you probably only need to remulch once a year. And I recommend doing it in the springtime. Don't worry if it gets thin in the winter because we're not so concerned about water evaporating from the soil. So typically March, April is a great time to go in, renew your mulch. One thing that you're going to find is that as you're putting mulch down, it's going to seem like it's disappearing faster. And what you're noticing is that you have got a really good soil biology going. And there are a lot of organisms living in the soil that are actually decomposing that mulch. And that's a good thing because it's putting all those nutrients back into the plant root zone. So it's Mother Nature's way of fertilizing, is that decomposition of the plant material. And if you have a good mulch program, you're going to find that you're not going to use chemical fertilizers nearly as much. Did I answer the question okay? Yeah, okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I was muted. We had another question. Thank you, Tim. That was very, very helpful. Another question that came in is, do you recommend this tubing for vegetable gardens as well?
Oh yeah. Oh, especially because it's the 12-inch on center emitters. It works fantastic in vegetable gardens. Especially if you're growing in furrows where you can just lay the tubing, you know, next to where the plants are. Probably a little bit hard to start seed with this. That would depend on kind of what your soil type look like and the topography of your yard, that kind of stuff. You may still have to do some hand watering to get the seeds to germinate if you're growing from seed. But if you're growing plants that were already started in the nursery, you know, there may be 4-inch little pots or something like that, this would be fantastic for that. And basically what you would do is just put a plant at each emitter in the furrow and just run lines of this.
That's great. And can the emitters be closed off?
I think with this system, yes. Rainbird makes I don't know, bug plug or goof plug, something like that, and it can be inserted to close emitters where you don't want it.
Okay.
John, have you used those? Have you used any kind of plugs with this system? I don't know if you heard me.
I think Jonathan's hearing might just need to be unmuted.
Hi, yeah, I was muted. Sorry about that. But yeah, in the past, we have not used the plugs for the specific tubing that's provided in the kit, but we have used like dummy plugs for the emitters that we place ourselves on the blank tubings.
Okay.
And they've worked, you know, just fine. But as far as the ones that of the tubing that's provided in the Rainbird, we haven't used those plugs quite yet.
I don't have a part number or anything like that, so we should probably confirm that that they do make a plug for this, but I'm almost positive they do.
Okay, definitely.
And Tim, can the blank tubing be buried to go under a strip of lawn?
Absolutely. That's what it's there for. It shines. Any place you don't want water, but you need to, you know, if you're going under a sidewalk, going under a lawn, maybe your plants are 10 or 15 or 20 feet apart, you know, because you got some big trees or something. The blank tubing works beautifully for that. And again, it just slides right onto the fittings, just like the tubing with the emitters inside. And it's the same color. It looks identical. So be careful when you do your install, as a matter of fact, to make sure that you're, if you want the tubing with the emitters, you can see them in the tubing. Priscilla, do you want to go back to me real quick? Let's see if I can get a good view of this. I don't know if this is going to work or not. Right there, yeah, I guess I can get closer. Right there is one of the emitters, and these are every 12 inches on center, and that's a 0.6 gallon per hour emitter, and it's pressure compensating, which means that you get the same amount of water at every single emitter along the entire length of this tubing. So yeah, that's the emitter right there, and they're factory installed.
We had another question come in, and I know you had mentioned the water savings. They actually were interested in, if you have this system, assuming the plants receive the same amount of water, what are we looking at in terms of water savings?
Oh.
And I know that's a challenge but I think you had mentioned that, you know, this system only uses 2 gallons per hour. Is that correct?
0.6 gallons per
0.6,
hour.
so even less.
A gallon an hour. You know, most spray systems are so inefficient just by their nature that I would bet your water savings at a minimum is going to be 50%. At a bare minimum, and it might even be higher than that.
Yes.
All the water that comes out of this system, unless there's a mechanical malfunction, is going right to the plant root zone. And it's not bothered by evaporation, which is a big problem with overhead spray systems. It's not bothered by wind or drift. It's not bothered by misting because of too much water pressure. So a lot of the inherent problems and inherent inefficiencies with overhead spray system go away right off the top with drip. The only way this drip system loses some efficiency is if you're putting water where you don't want it to go. If you're putting water into an area that doesn't have plants that are going to benefit from it, then that could be considered an inefficiency. But they give you a way around that by giving you that blank tubing so that you can bridge areas where you don't want water to go down, you know, onto the soil.
And when I know we did some calculations on the potential water savings for this program, and you're absolutely right. We looked at about 50% on the conservative side, and then really the savings can be closer to 70% to 75%. So really effective, efficient way of reducing your watering for your outdoor landscape, and also reducing water waste, which we see a lot of in the city with sprinkler systems that have overspray.
Where you're going to see this really shine is if you've got clay soils or you've got steep slopes, because it will eliminate runoff, and that is a huge problem with overhead spray systems. In that we put the water down faster than the soil can absorb it, and then it becomes runoff. It just runs right off, which is water that isn't going to any beneficial use. With the drip, because we're putting it down so slowly, you eliminate that completely, even on steep slopes.
And we had a question come in for suggestions on how often to drip water each week. Any suggestions?
The beauty of this is, you know, our mantra when watering, no matter what you're watering, is water deeply, water infrequently. That is kind of our way of mimicking Mother Nature. Is when we do water, we want to water the entire root zone, and we want to get that water deep into the soil, because that's how we kind of drought proof our plants, is by optimizing their root development. And that's not only spreading how far the root system spreads to the sides, but how far down we can get the root system to go. And with the drip, you know, you can water for an hour and a half, 2 hours, if you want to kind of mimic a rainstorm, and really do some deep watering and still not have runoff.
And then we did have a question come in on, and there were a few of these, and I apologize if you've addressed it, but this is, how do you connect the blank tubing to the emitter tubing?
You would use a coupling.
Okay.
Yeah, let me see. Basically, you would use a, I don't have, oh, I do have one. Here we go. Right. I did such a good job putting this in. Heck.
I could just interject for a sec. Oh, I just want to let everyone know, if you don't have any questions and if you don't feel like you need to listen to any questions, you can log off now if you like. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
So what you're looking at there is actually a connector for tubing to attach two pieces of tubing together in a straight line. You've got a barbed tubing here, you've got barbed tubing here, and you would literally have the blank tubing on one side and the tubing with the emitters on the other side. And this is made specifically for that kind of application where you want to attach two pieces of tubing together.
And Tim, as the landscape plants evolve over time, does the system need to be adjusted by connecting emitter tubing where there was blank tubing?
Could be, especially if you're installing new plants, definitely. The one thing I would do is leave yourself plenty of slack, because especially if you're putting in a brand new landscape, the tubing in a brand new landscape is going to go more or less right up against the base of the plant, because the root balls are small on new plants. But as that landscape matures and those plants mature, the root system also matures and grows. And you want to be able to pull the tubing back away from the plant, making sure you keep it, over the plant's root zone, but not necessarily right up against the stem where you put it when the landscape was brand new. So yeah, leave yourself some slack when you put the system in, or you can create slack by putting in pieces of the blank tubing, so that you can move the tubing over time away from the base of the plant, out to make sure you're watering the entire root zone. Now, that's another good point there, is that you don't have to wet the entire root zone of the plant. Typically, we shoot for about 50% coverage. So it's not like you need to have 2 rows of tubing going to every single plant or anything like that. Basically, our goal is to make sure that we're wetting about 50% of the plant's root ball when we water, and that is sufficient for good plant development. But I was going to show you, this is the tubing that has the emitters in it, and this is the blank tubing. And they're identical, other than one has emitters on the inside and one doesn't. So connecting them together, not an issue at all. They're the same color, same size, same everything. One has holes in it, put in it by the factory, so the water will drip out of it, and one does not.
And for the one, if someone has tubing which does not have emitters prefabricated, can you just quickly let them know how to create those emitters in the solid tubing? I know there's a tool for that.
Absolutely. Assuming that you have, I'm going to assume you have a pressure regulator and you have a filter on that system. I mean, if it's not, one of our systems, every drip system has to have a pressure regulator and has to have filtration. So if this is not like one of these kits, then you might have to make sure that gets installed. But they actually make a tool called a punch, where you can come along and you can actually put holes in this tubing any place you want them. And what you do is you first punch a hole, and then they make an emitter that pushes into that hole and it seals up around it. That's a little bit more flexible system. I don't think it's as durable because the emitters are on the outside of the tube, so they're much more likely to get broken off. That's why I really love this tubing that has the emitters on the inside. That's one of the things that makes it such low maintenance. But you absolutely can install emitters on the blank tubing. And a place where you might do that is, let's say you have a big tree and you don't have a lot of plants planted underneath it. It's just sort of isolated. You could run tubing out to that tree, make a loop or two around the base of it, and then put emitters just where you want them, to make sure that you're wetting the root zone of that tree. But you have some versatility in those emitters too, because you can get 2 gallon an hour emitters, 1 gallon an hour emitters. So it does have some flexibility.
And if the tubing gets damaged or cut by accident, can you just give us a quick tip on how to repair that?
Absolutely. That's another place where you would use one of these couplings. You would cut out the damaged piece and just splice in a new piece. You could either do the blank tubing or you could do the tubing with the emitters.
We had a question come in about pressure. The pressure at the valve I intend to use is already regulated to 42 PSI. Is this an acceptable input pressure for the regulator provided?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're actually pressure rate, doing it twice there. So you shouldn't have any issues at all. And it won't hurt the pressure regulator that they give you.
And I know you addressed this already, but we did have a few questions come in. So I just wanted to make sure that people can be told that this is on the video recording. It's about the flushing of the system. Did you show us how to flush the system? There were a few questions that came through.
Remember, you're going to put one of these flush caps on the end of any of the runs that are stub-ended or dead-ended runs. And what this allows you to do is you pop the cap off the end, and now water is just going to free flow out of that. When you turn the valve on, the water is just going to free flow, and any debris that might be in the line is going to get blown out the end here. And you probably only need to run it for maybe 30 seconds or so. And then you just put the cap back on like that, and you're good to go. You probably only need to do that maybe once or twice a year.
Okay, that's great. We have a question that just came in here at the end. Would drip work for the lawn?
Oh, that's a little bit of a double-edged sword. The technical answer to that is yes, absolutely. But installing it would really be a major chore.
And I think for the purpose of this drip kit, we're recommending it for shrubs and trees and plants, sort of areas that are not the lawn, unless they're removing the lawn and planning to putting in drought-tolerant plants.
Yeah, it would really, you need an immense amount of material, of tubing, because you would have to take that lawn area and put in a grid of drip tubing. Let's say we're using this 12-inch on center where the emitters are 12 inches on center. Mm-hmm. Then you're going to have pipe also 12 inches on center. So you're going to create this entire grid underneath the lawn where you're watering from the bottom up. And it takes an immense amount of material to do that. Typically, if that was going to be done, and again, in Pasadena, that's not the intent of this, so with PWP's program, you have to tear the whole lawn out. You have to start from scratch with getting everything graded, putting the tubing down, and then laying the new yard over the top of it. And from an economic point of view, it would be very expensive because of the amount of material you would need. The other problem with that is it limits your cultural practices. You can no longer aerify or dethatch because you take a chance on damaging the tubing underneath. So the technical answer is yes, but I don't recommend it.
Great feedback. The question, how flexible is the tubing? Can it make a U-turn? How do you enhance the flexibility?
It is quite flexible. I mean, you see, I wouldn't go any tighter than that on your curves because it can kink. It can develop kinks if you go tighter than that. So I'd say that's probably about 24 inch diameter curve. Laying it out in the sun helps immensely. It's much easier to install this stuff in warm weather than it is in cold weather. And worst case scenario, if you need a turn tighter than say 24 inches, you can actually go ahead and use elbows. And if you used an elbow, bear with me just a second. No. Well, heck. I thought I had another elbow. Oh, I do. If you use elbows, I mean, you could literally put this as close together as you would need. You would just use a small piece of tubing in between there. So on its own, you can bend it to about 24-inch diameter. And if you need something tighter than that, just use a couple of elbows.
I think we made our way through all the questions in the chat, and then some of the questions were also answered in the chat. So unless it was repeated quite often, I didn't announce it right now. So thank you, Tim. That was so helpful. I think I'm going to hand it back over to Priscilla, and we'll go again just through a few points regarding the application, and if you joined us today, what the next step is, and we thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you so much. Really quick, I think Jonathan had a question in the chat box.
Tim, I had just one question. Someone in the chat box made a really good question that I kind of wanted to get your opinion from. They mentioned, how do we install a flush point if we're just going to loop the system? Or how do you go about flushing the system?
Typically, if you loop the system, because the water flows from two different directions, you don't get the issues with emitters clogging and that kind of stuff. You can always cut a T into the loop system like this and put a short piece of tubing on it and then mount the flush to that. I would do that at the low point in the system. Even if you loop it, go ahead and, your irrigation pipe, it's going to come in on this side and go out on that side and go back out around through the yard to make a big loop. At the low point in the system, you could still install this, have a short piece of tubing come off of it, and then mount the flush at that point. Try to mount your flush at the low point in that case if you're doing loops.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So yes, just to recap really quickly, everyone that has submitted their application, if you haven't already done so, please get those applications in at the water@cityofpasadena.net inbox. But the next step is that now that you're in our database, so you have your application, you will be notified via email next week. I will be emailing you. I will be letting you know where and when you can pick up your kit. Yeah, and then there's that. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. This was a great workshop. I will also be sending next week a short, very, very short 5-question survey just for us to get feedback on how we can improve as well. Thank you all so much. I'm also recording this session, so we will have this as a resource for you all as well.